Saw you. You had 3 specialists going into spring camp. Now you got a whole new specialist group essentially coming in for fall camp. What is that like? You talked a little bit about how aggressive you guys were going to be in the off season. What was that process like, getting some of those faces on joint?
Well, I just think, looking at what our needs were and then utilizing a combination of the portal, combination of high school, finding a baseball player making a transition, just looking for the right mix of guys and what we were trying to find athletically for each one of the 3 position groups and the 2 spots in each group. So we knew we were going to have a room of 6 and just trying to find the 6 best guys for that.
What's the challenge of turning over that unit again after spring? I mean, you come in now with all new faces again. What's the challenge for you and coaching?
Well, I think the challenge is finding out who's going to be the guy in each one of those spots, right? And just determining. And the wonderful thing about specialist world is it's very objective, right? It's quantifiable. You're not looking at a lot of conjecture or anything like that. You've got numbers that tell you player A is better than player B, and so you've got to find that. Those guys have done a great job. They all got here in the summertime. They've worked well as a group together. They all know each other well. We're holding all combinations open, so all the holders have worked with all the snappers, who have worked with all the kickers, so you try to keep that mix. And now it's proof in the pudding. Now you got to find out who that guy is. We've got an interesting mix. Try to, really what we've got, if you look at it, you've got a mix of young and old, in experience versus inexperience, both at the kicker spot, all 3 really, right? You've got Noe Ruelas, who's a grad transfer who, comes to us from JMU, who had a solid, really good year last year. And then we've got Noah McHugh, and Noah's a guy that I actually saw when I was at Rice, from Dallas Jesuit, and so you've got a grad guy that's got 1 year left, and one guy coming in with 5. The long snapper, you got Dalton Riggs, who's been a starting snapper in the Big 12, coming from BYU, backed up by Rockland Kelly, who's a true freshman, coming out of the Dallas area too, and then at the punter spot, you've got Anthony Veneri, who's a guy that was started for 2 years at Buffalo, transferred to Ohio State, was the backup at Ohio State a year ago, and then you've got Mason Denneberg, who's really a true freshman, right? That's got 5 out in front of him, but was a first-round draft pick in baseball, and is now in high school. Had been a very good punter, quarterback, all-around good athlete, and so now he's making the transition from baseball to football. So I like that. I like the old young combination in the room. I like the competitive nature of the room, and the work ethic. I like the athleticism that's in the room right now too.
Tell us about Dalton. I guess he had a special introduction. We heard a little bit about it when he introduced himself to the team. Did he do something a little bit out of the ordinary? Or
Dalton is extremely flexible. So he went up, introduced himself, and you got to kind of do something. And, he says, hey, I'm not really a good singer, I'm not a really good dancer, but I'm really flexible, and he just popped into the splits. And, if you're looking at a bunch of football players looking around going, woof, he just jumped down in there. So that was his intro to the team. And
did you almost pass out? I mean, with the idea of this is your could be your long snapper,
Interestingly enough, I had a long snapper at Cal, a young man by the name of Nick Sundberg, who went on and snapped for the at that time the Redskins / Commanders. Now for 10 years, I want to say Nick was in the league, and Nick was a guy that could do the splits too. So it's not the first time I'd seen it done by a snapper, but I did not know he could do that. And with the way he just jumped into it and did it was impressive, to say the least.
How did the guys respond?
They thought, well, first of all, they all moaned and groaned because they thought he might, they're like, oh, that looks painful. And then they were like, that's really impressive. So they got a kick out of it. Guys, guys are guys, There was the moan groan to the applause. So it was good.
Is this fall camp, is this an open competition for these spots, or do you have in your mind who's going to probably take over each of these?
I think, one is competition's real, right? It's always open.
Yeah.
But what you would say is that, the idea is that the experience of Noe Ruelas at kicker gives him a significant leg up. Dalton, same thing. Dalton and Rockland. I think the punting situation is one that's completely
Wide open.
wide open. I would say right now, you would say, hey, look, I have a tendency early on to list everything as an or anyway, but Noe and Dalton have experience over the two younger guys. Anthony has experience over Mason, but I think the punting one is just a little bit, we're going to find out. And again, if the young guy's better than the old guy, he plays. There are no labels. You can't. In today's world, man, you can't label walk-on scholarship freshman, senior. That stuff all goes out the window. You've got to play the best player. And, again, like I said, quantifiable in our world, man. We live in that world. We live in a number crunch world. And he who can get the ball back accurately and with good timing and protect, he's going to be the snapper. The kid that puts the ball through the pipes, the greatest percentage, he's going to be the kicker.
What stands out about Ruelas?
I think with Noe, just a couple things. One, he's got great range. He's got a leg that you can walk back quite a ways. He's kicked in games before. He's got experience. I like his fundamental technique. He's really repeatable. And those are all things you'll look for. He's very confident in what he does and how he goes about his business. He's very businesslike. He's been, he's well trained, and those are all positive things for you. And he's been out there. He's been under the lights. He's trotted out there, in game situations. So those are the things that pop out with him.
What about Mason? A guy you just talked about, a guy who's coming from the baseball background, who did have some football, obviously, early on. But what has been the adjustment for him? What have you seen from him, I guess, coming in, to being able to kind of step in and actually compete for that?
The one thing that's tough is not having been there for, he wasn't there for spring, right? So we don't get a lot of time. We don't really get time with those guys, very much time. But I think just the strength he carries is this guy's been a professional. He has that kind of work ethic. That's the way he's going to approach things, and I think that right now that's got to be his superpower. As he readjusts to putting a football and just doing what we're trying to get done, and knocking off a lot of rust. Tremendous athlete, obviously, right? But again, his superpower is just the guy that's going to work like a pro. He's been somebody that's been on top of everything. As far as his off-season work goes, the weight room says, all 6 of these guys, the weight room says have done a great job this spring or this summer, so that's great. But, now I'll get a chance to really get more hands-on with those guys. So we'll get a chance to really see where they're at. But just for him, it's just him and Anthony, in the punting world, it's really linear. You got to be able to live in that linear world. And
he's a little older, too. He's a guy who's
he brings a sense of maturity with it. And you got to realize this is a guy that has been to the top of the mountain. He's been to the valley. He's been to the valley, too, And I think anybody that's gone through some of the things that he's gone through, just trying to compete at that level, and the margin for error being as narrow as it is, and he had some tough injuries that obviously didn't help his baseball career, but this is a guy that's been in the fire, so that's a plus that he brings with him. But and Anthony's been a starter. He's punted in D1 games, so both those guys bring that kind of mentality, to go get it. So
is it your preference to have a